Hey, welcome to Ed, a podcast about the teaching life. This is Conversation 69, and I'm your host, Shane Lawrence. Ed is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network powered by ATB. And joining me this week is teacher and social justice advocate, Dan Scratch.
Awesome.
Hooray. All right. Well, Dan, thanks so much for, coming back on the show. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. No problem.
You are guest number 2 to be guest number 2.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to chatting with you again.
Yeah, well, it's I think it's a good time to be doing this. I read your blog post not too long ago. But I feel like I'm jumping the gun here. Maybe let's take a step back. It's been a while. So maybe let's start with, the quick sort of obligatory précis. What is it? What do you do?
Yeah, so I am a social studies teacher here in Edmonton, and I basically do that and then work on social justice stuff. And lately, kind of getting into bringing teachers into some conversation around what social justice education is.
Okay, what grade levels are you teaching?
10 to 12.
10 to 12. Okay, and you teach in kind of a different sort of environment than I think most teachers are used to.
Yeah, sorry about those overhead announcements, but
no, sorry. Hey, it makes it sound real.
Yeah, it does. Adds to the ambiance of this. Actually, no, I've changed settings since the last time we chatted.
Oh.
So, I was working at inner city high school, but now I worked at Alberta Ed for a year doing curriculum.
Yep.
And now I'm in Edmonton Public School Board, so more about a traditional high school.
Okay.
Yeah, doing kind of transitioning into that kind of thing to work with kids in a different capacity.
Right. And how's that change been then for you? Because you went from your student body before. You'd have students who, if they weren't present in classes because maybe, they didn't get a good night's sleep, they had to sleep on the street and that kind of thing. And, all these other kind of, very serious kind of issues that, I don't think normally face most teachers. So how's that transition been then for you, going to something a little less, I don't even know what the word is, extreme?
Yeah, it's been good. Like at the school I work at, it's a really diverse student population. Which has been really fun to work in. You have kids from all over the socioeconomic background. You have kids from really diverse communities, from Indigenous students to newcomers, to kids whose families have been here for generations. So you have all kinds of students that are here. So it's been really fun to work in a very multicultural environment, which my last setting wasn't a ton of that. So it's been fun to work in a big public school in that way. Obviously, it's challenging in the sense of there's much larger class sizes than what I was used to back at inner city. But it's interesting. Kind of, I still call them my inner city kids who I have at the school who are going through similar challenges. The difference is for me, instead of having a classroom full of those kids, I have maybe one or two in a couple of my classes who are struggling and going through a lot of things, who need some extra supports and help. So. Just identifying them and reaching out to them has been more of a challenge in this new setting, but still something that, is very near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. So, okay. How come? Why is this so near and dear to you?
I'm very interested in the issue of equity in education. Right. And so I wonder a lot about, and my stats might be off here, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I believe province-wide, our graduation rate something about 76% after 3 years of high school. When you push that to 5 years of high school, that can go, I think it goes up to about 83%. But there's still a relative amount of kids from across this province who aren't graduating. And I want to know why that is, right? And a lot of it is to do with variables that happen outside of school, obviously with things like poverty and trauma and addictions and those kind of things that the young people get caught up with. But I'm wondering, what can schools do to create a stronger or deeper sense of belonging for young people? When I worked at inner city, I don't remember if I told you this last time we chatted. We did a research kind of study every single year. And what we do is sit down with students and we talk one-on-one just about why didn't they have success in their prior schools, in their more mainstream traditional schools, which I'm now working in. And every single one of those students, no matter who I talked to, no matter what year it was, they always said the same thing. They said, the reason why I didn't have success is because I didn't feel anybody cared about me. I didn't have a sense of belonging at the school I was at. And so I didn't think it mattered if I left or didn't go to class or didn't do anything, because I didn't feel anybody cared. And so I'm very interested in how can we move our schools in a direction that is based on that, a relational sense of belonging place where students can feel that they do belong, that they do matter, and that there are people there who care about them. Because there are certainly educators in every school that care about kids. But I think the challenge is that, when you have very large class sizes, 35, 36 and up, and trying to make those connections and those relationships with everyone, it can get very difficult on the teaching side of things. So it's been a good experience for me on that end to see the other side of things and to be.
Yeah. So, okay. First of all, 36, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah. There's big class sizes. And right now I'm teaching a lot of ELL classes, which is a nice little move for me. So those classes are smaller, which is great because it gives me more time to be one-on-one with those kids who are just learning English for the first time. So that's really nice. But some traditional classes, you're looking at 35 and up in some cases, which is really, really big. And it's a challenge of how do you operate in that classroom, especially if you're a teacher who works on relationships, right? Like even we have 80-minute blocks a day, but even those 80 minutes in order to get to know everybody well and what they're going through and to get to know them as people, it's a tough challenge.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's hard with half that number, much less.
Yeah.
So crazy class sizes. But I really want to dig more into this social justice thing. I mean, that's what fascinates me so much.
Sure.
I mean, was there some sort of a moment in your life where you knew like this was something that's going to be really important to you? Or is it just a slow emerging realization, or how did that happen for you?
Yeah, I think it's been a slow, I can't pinpoint it to a certain moment or anything, but like, I would say that like, I struggled a bit when I was in high school, as a student. Like I had my own struggles. I had my own, failing math class. I remember specifically, not to pick on math at all, but, I had some confrontations with teachers and I knew I wanted to be a teacher, probably early on to spite my older teachers, which is not the greatest reason to become a teacher. But I just wanted to, I thought I could do it. And as I got into teaching, I had a really good professor who kind of introduced me to a few texts and some books and some authors like Howard Zinn and Paulo Freire and some different authors that kind of got me thinking about education differently and got me thinking about it on a more macro level. So not just what happens in my own classroom, but like how is the education set up in a way that maybe doesn't benefit every single student. And I don't think those things are set up in a malicious way. Absolutely not. But I think as the education system has developed over the last 100 years, there's, we still have kind of things in place that doesn't benefit every student. So the questions I have are, can we have that? Is it possible to make an equitable education system where every student's needs are taken care of? Is that even possible with all the elements that we're dealing with? And I don't have a straight answer to that question, but I think those questions are worth interrogating. So over time, as I read and got experience, and obviously working with the most marginalized, vulnerable people in our system, it's definitely given me a perspective that's really driven my practice. I think as a social studies teacher, I often talk about you can measure a nation by how well they treat their most vulnerable. And so I like to think about the same thing in education. How are we treating our most vulnerable? Are we doing are we putting things in place to make it as equitable as we can, considering all the different elements that we have to deal with? And these are big questions, and I don't presume to have the answers to all of them, but I do think they're at least at a minimum worth having dialogue on.
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you're dealing with, well, actually, I want to jump back because you talked about sort of systemic failings. I mean, there's a lot of things that aren't under our control. I mean, we are, our purview is the classroom and maybe a little bit beyond that. But I mean, what is it that we're doing that exacerbates the already disadvantaged situation that so many students have when they come in the classroom?
Yeah, good question. I think we have to take a look at the big piece of standardization in education. And I'm not a person who's completely against standardization, but I think what most research is telling us, there's a meta-analysis that just came out of the University of Washington a couple of years ago. And it said, with standardized exams, the biggest indicator of success on those exams is socioeconomic status, right? It's not the quality of a teacher in a classroom. It's not anything else. It's the biggest variable that contributes to success on those exams. are basically, in our case, your postal code, where you live, the amount of money that your
Gee.
parents bring home. And so
Yeah.
already kids starting out with, on the lower end of that spectrum,
Mm.
are going to be falling further behind, and because of, all the different variables they have to deal with. They're living in poverty. You're like I said, like I've said many times, in poverty, you're worrying about your next meal, where you're going to stay, all those kind of things. You're more of your basic needs than worrying about the dates of the French Revolution, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so there, that's a piece to it. And yeah, so I think the question we have to consider is, just like you said, like our purview is the classroom, and there's a lot we don't control. And the
Mm.
change that we might want to see isn't inevitable and isn't guaranteed. And and as you know, any kind of change happens slowly over a long period of time. So the question, I think, is twofold: is how do you have good conversations with colleagues, with educators, to think about these big picture things, but also what can you immediately do in your classroom to help all students succeed? And that's where I think the other element of social justice education.
Right. Right. So, okay. So what do you do then to help all students succeed, especially the ones who are, coming through the door from the wrong zip code?
Yeah,
Not the
absolutely.
wrong zip code. That's not the right way to put that.
I know what you mean.
Anyway, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I think a ton of educators I know work this way. So I think it's pretty simple. You have to operate from a relational point of view. So the number one thing in your classroom is relationships that you build with the students in your class.
Right.
So that's number one. Like, are you getting to know them? Are you taking the time to hear them? And I think you can do that in a number of different ways. I think what I try and do is, in social studies, like, I'm really interested in the idea of what does democracy look like in a classroom. Specifically, like, if we're going to send these students out after they graduate to go live in society, I do think they have to be, educated, democratic citizens. And democracy is not just the memorization of the branches of government, but it's also action. So that would be, having a voice in decision-making processes in the classroom. So, every 2 weeks in my class, we have a class meeting and we talk about, the rules and expectations we established at the beginning of the year. Are we living up to them? Is everything in the class going okay? I give them voice on how they want to be assessed at times in terms of demonstrating what they know. Just kind of putting some decision making in their hands to take larger ownership over the classroom. That builds a little bit of community. What the next piece of community that you do, though, to me is I have something called like a teacher advisor. I don't know what to call it, but I'm calling it a teacher advisory council.
Mhm.
It's kind of stealing off the ideas of Chris Emdin, or it's not.
I was just going to say, yeah, it sounds like a cogent.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
shouldn't say kind of. It is stealing off of off of his ideas,
Yeah.
and so I've kind of adapted it a little bit differently than the cogents that he writes about in his work, just to fit my own context and my own needs. But yeah, I do the same thing where basically I have a number of kids in the classroom who I meet with on a regular basis to talk about what's going on. How can we build community? How can we have fun? And so all those little things that you do, I think, just build and build and build. One of the things, obviously, like Chris, like bringing culturally relevant education and teaching is super important, right? So I know the kids I worked with back at Inner City, I know there's things like call and response teaching, bringing in music
Mhm.
and all different kinds of things, just create almost like a sense of healing in the classroom.
Right.
For those learners who especially have a tough time reading and writing, tend to be where they kind of fall through the cracks. And so if we can keep things on a storytelling, relational kind of basis for the first little bit, then we can integrate those other elements later on. But it's literally just about relationships and community, and that this is a place where they come that is safe, that they belong. They see themselves on the walls of my classroom, in the posters I put up and the different pieces of student work that I put up, and as well as in the stories we tell of social studies. Right, it's not just one perspective of social studies, but it's multiple, and telling the different stories of people who've been here. And then that can be a challenge in a multicultural classroom when you have, students from all over
Right.
the world in there. Trying to get everybody's story in can be a bit of a challenge, but it's an important piece to allow even space for students to tell their own story of who they are, where they're from, and when they start doing that and breaking those down, they connect with each other, which creates that community.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It just reminds me of I don't even know who told me once, but just the idea that everyone has a story and everybody wants to be heard.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you don't buy into that, I mean, all you got to do is just catch yourself in a conversation, just waiting for your turn to speak, to share what you want to share. I mean, even just a few days ago, I experienced that, just sitting there listening to someone. I realized, wait a minute, I just want to tell my
Yeah.
story, right? I just want to be heard, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's valuable to kind of will help other students realize that what they have to say is valuable because then they feel valuable.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I think to me, like story is as I've gone down this path of teaching for a while now, I think the
Mhm.
stories we tell are super, super important. And not just the stories of history, but the stories that we tell of who we are, even as a nation or a community or whatever that might be. Like we oftentimes, when we look at Canadian history, we started digging into the kind of the black eyes of Canadian history, right? If we're looking at, obviously residential schools and the elements of Indigenous history in Canada and looking at Black history in Canada or LGBTQ history in Canada, those stories have some dark spots to them that are tough to teach. And those stories are important. But at the same time, we need to think of stories that, do create relationships and community amongst us. And what are the stories we haven't been telling of how we can kind of make this thing called Canada work even better than it does? How can we live in a society where we reduce the amount of prejudice and discrimination that exists or that students face? How can we create those things here in Canada? Because the ultimate goal of what they're learning is not just what they're going to regurgitate on a test, but it has to be more than that. It has to be a bigger picture of their rights and responsibilities as citizens in a democratic country after this. They're not just passive members of society, but they can be if they choose to be. I can't force them, but if they choose to be active members of society, what role do they want to play in their community? And just knowing that they have a role to play is important.
All right, we're going to get back to me and Dan in a second, but first I want to tell you about Let's Do Coffee. It's a new podcast hosted by Daniel Van Vielen and produced by the Maji Center for New Venture and Student Entrepreneurship at NAIT. Each episode features an interview with a student entrepreneur or NAIT alumnus. They dive into topics that explore the challenges, questions, and fears involved in operating their companies. The show comes out every 2 weeks, and you can find it at nait.ca/Maji Center. That's MAWJICENTRE. All right, let's get back to me and Dan. So would you feel then like the ultimate goal then of maybe social studies or school, like, is it just to make active citizens? Is that kind of what you're aiming at?
Yeah. And I think if you look back at, not that everybody's super well known on this, but curricular history in Alberta, that's been the goal of social studies in Alberta since probably the 1950s, was active citizenship. And I think it's something that's become a little too politicized in the last little bit, talking about active citizenship. And I know with the new curriculum rewrite, a lot of people have taken some, issue with that term. But that's been part of our history in Alberta since the 1950s. And the reason why it's been was to promote democracy. And I think that's a story that we can really get behind. If regardless of our political stripes, sometimes the amount that we disagree, democracy should be what's going to bind us together. And that the idea that we can have a society where the power is within the people who live in that society and that they can take an active role in shaping that society, that's a powerful story to tell. And I don't think it's one that we should back away from. And so it's been a part of our history for many, many years before I got into teaching, and I hope it's still around many years afterwards. But it's something that I think we need to be a little more cognizant of. And even in our teaching and our pedagogy, like, I think about what does a democratic educator look like? What does that really mean to bring democracy into the classroom? Because democracy should be training for life almost. And the way I see it, I think a lot of times we can get, and this is myself included, can get stuck into sometimes some authoritarian patterns of teaching, where we're making all the decisions, telling students what to do, just kind of, being the authoritarian in the classroom. I think there's a space we have to kind of work out. What does it mean to be democratic? And it's not just kind of giving all the rules and giving the power or control of the classroom up to the student. You still have authority as a teacher to make sure it's safe and that's running well and working. But how can we not be authoritarian, but bring in elements of democracy to really get students think outside of their comfort zone of that education is not just being told what to do and how to do it, but also having some agency in that process.
Ooh, I like that. That's a t-shirt right there.
There you go. I'm here all week.
Well, do you find though, politics, at least to my mind, in the last 3-4 years has really become a very polarizing thing. Not just polarizing, but polarized. It feels like there's just this tendency to vilify the other side of the argument as if there's, two sides, you know, right? So,
Totally.
so I mean, are you finding that that's a bigger challenge nowadays, or?
Yeah, it's. I always go. I always draw my experience of teaching around
Mhm.
politics. Obviously, when I was at Inner City and I was there for 6 years, um, working with folks who are going through the issues they were going through, it wasn't hard to talk about big controversial
Mhm.
issues, right? Because everybody was kind of on the same page, coming from the same experience. Whereas now you get into a classroom that is diverse with experience, and then you have people all over the political
Right.
spectrum. And it is difficult. It is very difficult because you do have people trying to speak their truth of what they've experienced in this world, and other people saying, well, I have the right to say whatever I want under the guise of free
Mhm.
speech. And if it offends you, well, that's your problem, not mine. And so that makes social justice education difficult, but also worthwhile and exciting, because we have to help students navigate these complicated
Yeah.
conversations. Um, and knowing how to empathize with people and to see other perspectives, see other points of view, and really try to understand where are they coming from with their point of view.
Right.
Why are they saying things that they're saying? Um, and we have to create that dialogue to sit with each other, to understand each other, and and have those conversations. Like, look at Twitter or look at any kind of social media, and it's, you just put your head in your hands when you look at the debates going on. It's just can't even look at it,
Yeah.
right? Um, I wonder from a big picture point of view, what's that doing to our ability to have conversations with each other? And you know what? I think there's a little bit of humility needed too.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know how you feel, but the older I get, the less I feel I know.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I'm just shutting up a lot more often than I used to because I, I don't know. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I don't know everything, and I kind of like it like that. That there's just so much to learn, and so I think listening to other people and being in conversation, being in dialogue with people, I think those are necessary skills, not only in the classroom but in the real world as well. But as we know, it's a lot tougher when there's not a classroom to organize everybody into. So,
Yeah.
so
Well,
yeah,
and I do find it's, yeah, as you say, the older you get, like, yeah, it's this increasing sense of like, wow, I know nothing. I really know
yeah,
nothing. But one thing that, was impressed upon, has been impressed upon me through various sources is that as a teacher, you're not supposed to politicize the education environment, or at least you're not supposed to be political. So, I mean, you're talking about a lot of really political things and social justice and equity. And there's, again, if you're talking on the political spectrum, there's a wide variety of, opinions on how these sorts of issues should be dealt with. So, I mean, how do you walk into that space?
I try and come at it. I mean, it's relational,
Mm.
right? Like when it can be, with people that I work with and people that I, deal with on a professional basis, whether it's at workshops or conferences, whatever it is. Like, um, we we can't be afraid of being political as educators. Our job is inherently political, and just as you said, there's been many times where I've been told, like, well, don't ask that question. We can't talk about that. And that's a huge pet peeve
Hmm.
of mine, that as teachers like, we're not meant to just kind of blindly follow everything in our profession.
Yeah.
I think when we can purposefully and professionally ask questions and create dialogue on issues that are important to us, that's going to be better not only for us as teachers but for the students that we serve. And so we have to kind of, I don't want to say kick up a fuss, but we have to start having conversations on these big issues. And like I said, I don't have all the answers for people, but I do like to have conversation and do like to problematize things. I do that for myself. And the reason why I do that is because I do that for myself as a teacher. Like, I always call myself like the hardest working mediocre teacher in the game. I'm very,
Sorry, I love
I
that.
want to
That's
just get,
awesome.
yeah. I want to just get better at what I do all the time. And in order to get better, I ask tough questions of myself as a teacher. Am I doing this the best possible? Am I missing something?
Hmm.
What's in my blind spot? What am I not seeing in my classroom that is keeping me from being more effective? Am I too monotonous? Am I keeping, you know what I mean? All the
Yeah.
questions you ask yourself in your reflective practice, I think, is to say that we can't ask a question is just saying that our profession can't be reflective, which I think is the opposite of what we want to be. So,
Right.
Um, we we can't be afraid of politics. What we do is inherently political in the sense that not partisan politics,
Right.
but it's just political. And if I decide to teach about, let's say, the Chinese head tax or not, right? Like that's a political decision for me to include that story in our history or to not include it. As a teacher, when I'm choosing the type of examples and curriculum I'm going to bring in. So we have to be able to kind of be comfortable being uncomfortable. And it's great to have those conversations with your colleagues and to engage in that dialogue. Like I said, I don't know the answers to a lot of things. I do know from my experience that kids are hurting and kids are falling through the cracks. And so the question just becomes, what do we do?
Yeah.
And that can be scaled down to your classroom and what you do the things that you can do in your classroom, and then it can get scaled up to a school and district level and province level and so on and so forth. But those are just important questions that we have to do. And I just can't imagine a world where we can't have conversations about things. And I've had lots of conversations with educators over the last, 7 years about, like facing repercussions for bringing social justice to their classroom or getting in trouble and all those kinds of things. And it's really sad. It's just really sad that people get in trouble for wanting to bring these conversations to the classroom. And there are conversations young people are having anyways outside of the classroom.
Yeah.
But for a trained professional not be able to help young people facilitate that conversation, I think is a really it just makes me very sad.
Well, I think, the classroom is one of the best places to have those conversations, because
Absolutely.
if you're having them outside of the classroom, immediately, that whole silo effect starts to grab hold. And it's so easy just to get, everything so perfectly tailored to your own way of seeing things with, news algorithms and social media algorithms. I mean, it's like, I'm actually kind of annoyed at my phone right now because it just keeps on giving me all the stuff I want to see. And I'm just like, isn't there some sort of an algorithm where they can give me stuff that's going to annoy me, cause it's, I mean,
absolutely.
That'd be a tough sell, I think, to Google, but I mean, it'd be nice.
Totally. Yeah. And that's the, like your point there is that's super important. Like this is especially when you get to high school level, this is the last opportunity. A lot of kids are going to have the I guess the opportunity to be in a classroom, talking about these issues in a formal, facilitated by a professional kind of way. Right? Like this is our chance to sit down with people that you wouldn't always be around, that you wouldn't always hang out with or work with, to sit down and have conversations about how do you experience Canada, right? How do you experience your community? Do you face any issues? And if so, what are they? What do you see? And from your perspective, you tell us, and then we work through those. And, a lot of students don't see any issues. Some students see a lot of issues.
Right.
And that depends on who they are and where they're from and what their life has been like. But I think at a minimum, to understand that not everybody sees the world as the same way you do is a valuable skill that a lot of kids, maybe sometimes missing when they walk out of high school.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It reminds me of a student I used to have who was a charming young man, grew up to be, a very wonderful and responsible adult. But in grade 7, he had a little tendency to not measure his words so carefully. So I used to have this like a Post-it pad, and I had written out on a whole bunch of different ones, just there are other people in the world besides me. And he'd be talking to me, and every now and then I just grab one of these things off my Post-it and just sort of stick it on his desk and walk away and be like, oh yeah.
That's smart. That's good. I like that. I'm going to steal that actually.
Yeah.
That's great. I had a student last semester. He's really, really lovely kid, but he just was so obsessed with playing devil's advocate. Like he didn't necessarily believe what he was saying, but he wouldn't tell anybody else that. It was only after him and I had some conversations last year, but he would really say things that would make quite a few students upset in the classroom. And he was just going for the shock value.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the conversations we had was like, do you understand that to you it might be shock, but like for a lot of the students to say the things that you're saying is hurtful. And he didn't understand that. He's like, well, this shouldn't hurt you. It's just a joke. And we talked about how, well, do you think that jokes can be hurtful at the same time as they're funny to other people? Like think about the content of that, right? So it took him a while, but we have a social justice club here that I run with another teacher, and he asked him to come out to it because it's more of we sit in a circle, about 10, 15 students, and we just talk about each week is a different topic of discussion. And so he came out to a couple of them. One was on racism that he came to, and he just sat and listened, and he didn't play devil's advocate. And he walked away like, just thinking like, okay, like I guess I didn't consider some things. And, that just goes to show the power of not me as a teacher, like yelling at him to think differently, but to come and him to be open-minded enough to come to a situation that he wasn't necessarily comfortable in.
Yeah.
And just listen to people and listen to other students' perspectives. And hopefully that was a little moment of growth for him. Is he still playing devil's advocate in his classes? Absolutely. But he's just doing it hopefully in a little less hurtful of a way.
A little more measured. I like that. So then you're obviously you're wading into this kind of territory all the time. I mean, like, what is, say, a strategy that you would give to a teacher who's like, I'm, in this kind of space and I'm having the worst time trying to get my kids to be civil? Or what's the way that you can sort of help someone else who's looking to do this sort of conversation frame that in their room for success?
Yeah. So it really depends on the context of what you're dealing with your kids. Fortunately, now we live in a time with the internet where there's just so many resources out there to help you bring social justice into the classroom, whether it's good folks at Rethinking Schools or Teaching Tolerance or whatever it is, depending on the topic you want to talk about. There's lots of resources to help you do that. That being said, I would just say before you bring any type of content in, I'm going to go back, I sound like a broken record on this. You have to have the relationships and the trust of your students to bring up difficult conversations. If you don't have that trust, if they don't trust you that you're going to guide this in a good and safe way for them, it's going to be very difficult, and students will be on edge and they'll be less open-minded. So you want to basically demonstrate before you start bringing in those hard conversations that you're there. I don't want to say protect them, but you have this set up in a way that you're going to make sure it's safe and good for everybody. Yeah. So I would recommend to do that in not just an open discussion, but to do it in maybe have a Socratic seminar, or maybe have kind of a more structured, a more organized kind of discussion or dialogue where students can do some research or preparation in advance. Maybe the whole class reads an article that you've chosen ahead of time, and they maybe answer a few questions on it or prepare a few questions of their own, and then come to the conversation after reading a common article or a common text and to sit down and whatever structure you want to put in. And I find when you add the structure and guidelines to those hard conversations at first, it allows people to have a say who want to have a say. And it creates the conditions for every voice to be heard, rather than just being an open conversation where you just have, maybe a few of your more extroverted students kind of dominating the conversation. So that's what I would recommend. But also, let's not forget about parents and administrators and all those kinds of things. Like, if you're going to be bringing controversial topics into the classroom, always a good idea to maybe send a letter home beginning of the year to parents saying, in this classroom, we will be talking about controversial issues. And if you have any questions, let me know. And to let, if you're concerned even more, let the administrators know as well that, you want to have these good conversations. And I think if you come at it from a point of view of creating dialogue and facilitating conversation, I've heard stories of them existing, but I've never met an administrator who was against that. So, it's important that you kind of do your due diligence as well.
Right. I like that. Okay. Well, I feel like this has come full circle. This is probably a good place where we can say, yep, problem solved. So
yeah, done.
Yeah. Excellent. No more problems ever. Well, Dan, if people want to get in touch with you or read some of your writings, where can they get in touch?
Yeah, for sure. Well, people can follow me on Twitter. I'm still there. Who knows how long that'll be there? But
how long you can stand it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still there. That's at DanScratch03. I am writing on Medium now, so I kind of changed my blog over from the old Blogger account. I think that's just at DanScratch on Medium. And I'm going to do a little promotion here, if you don't mind.
Fire away.
Myself and a few other educators, we've started something called the RAD Educator Network. And so what that is a collection of any teachers, educators, anyone involved in education, even social workers, youth workers, psychologists, anyone who works in a school, who are interested in social justice and equity education. And what we did was we had an initial meeting in the summertime over 3 days. And so we met at the Moonlight Bay Retreat Center outside Wabamun. We met and we had 3 days of good conversation about social justice and equity in education. And we're working our way into being a network. So we're going to, in Edmonton and hopefully in other spots around the province, we're going to have kind of monthly meetups. One night might just be a social night where people can come and grab a coffee or a beer and just connect with other educators. Mm-hmm. 1 month might be a workshop on a specific topic. One month might be a site visit to a different school to see what they're doing at their school around those issues. So we're just kind of developing a little bit of a network, a little bit of a community, as a lot of teachers, have expressed the difficulties of working with social justice in the past, and just building a community among educators to share resources with, share challenges and successes with, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a Facebook group, which is called the RAD, R-A-D network, RAD Educator, network. Okay. And there's a Facebook group there, and there's a website and all that good stuff to come. So Facebook group for now. Anyone wants to come, just ask to join and we'll add you in. Beauty.
Love it. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Dan. I'll check that out.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And we'd love to have you come out too, if you ever have the time.
Well, you had me at beer, so yeah, I'll probably come.
That's always the key to the best professional development. Not that I want to be biased towards it, but my best ideas come from that. So
absolutely. All right. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great chatting with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to chat.
All right. You take care.
You too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. All right, and if you want to get in touch or you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can email me at theedpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Twitter at theedpodcast. If you want to listen to more of Ed, you can head over to the website, theedpodcast.podbean.com, or you can find us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Just search up Ed Conversations. Ed is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. You can find this and all other member podcasts at albertapodcastnetwork.com. Ed can also be heard on Voice Ed Radio. It's 24-hour internet broadcasting devoted to the best ideas in education. Just head over to voiced.ca. So, on behalf of myself and Dan, thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.